We've all got that backpacking trip in our mind that stands out as the best trip ever. Maybe it's the scenery, maybe the weather, or the company that you're with. Well, today Trips and I are going to be discussing our favorite backpacking trip, but it might not be for the reasons that you think. Stay tuned, it's coming up next. Hey, what's up guys, Miyagi and Trips. Today we're going to be doing a video on our best backpacking trip ever. We were tagged by Bryce Newbold, our buddy Bryce.
Who I now know who he is.
She knows who you are. So today, Bryce asked us to basically go over our best trip ever. And instead of picking some place that has like super epic views or something that was like super memorable as far as the views go, we picked our trip where we were both kind of introduced to backpacking, well, at least for trips anyway.
Yeah.
So we have a family member who grew up in South Carolina? North Carolina. And as a kid, he did a lot of trips, just like day trips and short section hikes on the Appalachian Trail. And for a few years, he had been talking to us about joining him and his family. He said, yeah, we're getting together, my wife and their nephew, and we're going to go hike the Appalachian Trail. Would you like to join us? And I was like, hey, actually, I have some time off. And I said, hey, Trips. She wasn't Trips at the time. But I said, hey, what do you think about that? And the stars kind of aligned, and we started planning it. It was supposed to be a 4-day, 3 overnight trip.
Yeah.
Trips had never backpacked before.
No, and I was not excited about this. I was kind of taking one for the team. I was willing to go and fully expected not to like a single second of it.
No.
At all.
So as a kid, she took trips to the Smoky Mountains and things with her family where they did day hikes, but never on an overnight, never with a backpack where you're heading out into the woods. I, on the other hand, I grew up in the woods. My father was a big hunter, so since I was a tiny little kid, I was dragged out into the woods at 4 o'clock in the morning and basically sat in a tree and watched the forest wake up around me. So I was very familiar with the outdoors. Took a bunch of backpacking classes in college, and that's kind of where I was introduced to backpacking. It was something that was really cool. I liked it a lot, but it was never something that I really fell in love with. And so kind of fast forward to 2015, and here we are planning this trip. So I let, his name's Joel. He later got the name Fragile, which is his trail name, and we'll tell you more about that, but we'll call him Fragile for now. He started planning the trip, and we just kind of got our stuff together. We had nothing to do with planning the actual trip, which usually I'm super OCD about. But in this case, I just let somebody else take care of it. So he planned the trip, and we got our backpacking stuff together. And I had a bunch of stuff from college. I thought it was cool at the time. But you'll see some of these pictures. Now, 5 years later, I laugh at what we used, and we'll tell you more about that. But, we made a bunch of trips to REI, and we got everything that we needed.
Nope. I bought my shoes on clearance.
Oh, that's right. It wasn't all REI.
I definitely paid for that.
Which was later a mistake.
Yes.
We had a super cool tent. It came from this outfitter. What was it? Walmart.
Yes.
Yeah, it was the Ozark Trail Dome tent.
Newest edition.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we'll tell you more about that. That kind of didn't work out too well. And I had a 90-liter backpack. I mean, literally, you could have fit a small child in this thing.
Yes.
The backpack alone weighed 7 pounds. Some people's base weight is 7 pounds, but that's what my pack weighed. So kind of backing up. So we planned this trip, and we all went down in their van, and Trips actually started driving, and I slept. I don't think I drove at all. I slept the entire way down.
I think it was just Joel and I that drove.
Yeah. But so the plan was we were going to Uncle Johnny's hostel, and for those of you that are familiar with the Appalachian Trail, Uncle Johnny's is kind of a staple on the trail. And we got down there about noon-ish, I want to say. And 12:30, we took off from there, and Uncle Johnny's shuttled us out to Devil's Fork Gap. And that's at, let's see, what's the mileage? This is around mile 311 on the trail. And the plan was to head northbound, and it was kind of right around the time that the thru hikers were going through, and we knew nothing, absolutely nothing about thru hiking culture. And to give you an idea, 2015 was the year that Darwin on the trail, that's the year he did his thru hike, so he was just kind of making a name for himself. We didn't see him on the trail, but that kind of gives you the time period that we were out there. Fragile had this plan. So his plan was that we were all going to start about 15 minutes to a half hour apart, and we were all going to experience the trail for ourselves. And Trips and I looked at each other and we're like, no, we do everything together.
We do.
So we're going to do our thing, and you can do your thing, whatever it is that you want to do. Well, he's kind of one of these, trekking poles down to the ground, head down, and he's just beating feet making miles.
He also told us we should leave our phones in the car, remember?
Yeah.
Because we weren't going to have service. So none of us had a means of communicating away from each other either.
And we said no to that. So the first taste of the thru hiking culture, I'm going to let Trips explain this story, but we had just gotten to the trailhead, and literally we had no idea whether we were supposed to be heading north or south. We had no idea which way was which. We didn't have gut hooks we didn't have any maps whatsoever.
So we got to the trailhead, and there was a group of, I think, four or five thru hikers, and we actually had to ask them what direction they were going because we didn't know which way to go.
Do we go this way or that way?
And we were talking about the highlights of each day, and I told them that for me, the highlight for day one was how horrible one of the girls that was through hiking smelled and the waterfall. And that is what 5 years later stands out in my mind because it was awful.
Well, it was horrible.
It was awful.
I mean, I know what it's like to stink. I go on week-long hunting trips and things, and you just start stinking. But this was a stink. This was like...
Yeah. I can't even...
No.
There's not even words to describe it.
No, it was bad. So other than Uncle Johnny's, which we knew nothing about, it was a hostel.
Yeah.
That was kind of our first taste of thru hikers. So we hit the trail, and... So we were with Fragile and the Wanderer. You'll see the Wanderer if you've seen any of our other videos. She's hiked with us, pictured rocks.
She's
and
my
things.
sister.
That's her sister. So, and that's Fragile's wife at the time, and their nephew. So they all went ahead of us, and Fragile and Caleb was with us. They were way out in the lead.
They just sent it.
Yep. And so we were kind of at the back, which I have no problem with. I love taking pictures and I love taking video, and we kind of poke around. So. The Wanderer stayed with us for a while, and we talked. So the plan is that we were going to hike to the first shelter. And the first shelter, our very first shelter on the AT ever, was Hogback Ridge Shelter. So we were going to kind of see how everybody felt.
So that was about six miles.
Yeah, it was about 6 miles.
And nobody really knew what to expect. The Wanderer also had never backpacked. So she and I were both new to it, as was Caleb, our nephew. So... it was supposed to be like a reconvene and
see how everybody
evaluate and see if we were going to stay there or if we wanted to do more miles than that. So
we're hiking along, and finally, after 6.5 miles, doesn't sound like very long, but on the AT, that was our first mountain hike, my first mountain hike ever. And not that we were exhausted, but we got there, and it was Fragile and Caleb, and they're like, "Hey, where's the Wanderer?" And we're like, what do you mean? She was ahead of us the entire time.
We actually thought they were joking.
So, yeah, we thought they were joking. Well, when they had arrived, the water source is about a quarter mile from the shelter downhill. So they had actually taken all their stuff with them.
Yeah.
And they hiked down to the water source. And for those of you that have hiked the AT, getting water can be a little bit of a process. It takes a little bit of time. So you're talking a quarter mile there, a quarter mile back.
And they just took all their stuff.
And they took all the stuff.
So there was literally zero evidence of them having been there.
Right. So apparently the Wanderer showed up very shortly after they arrived, and she started asking, because there was already people there at the shelter, and she was asking, "Hey, have you seen these two guys?" And kind of gave their description, and everyone's like, "No, we haven't seen anybody." So she actually sat down and ate some food, had a little lunch there, and waited and waited and waited, and they didn't show up. So she figured, well, they must be feeling well. They must have hiked on. Because we weren't there yet. We were actually surprised that she hadn't waited for us.
Yeah.
So she took off. Now, we didn't know that. Fragile didn't know that. So he's asking us where she is, and we're like, what do you mean? She was ahead of us the entire time. So now we all had no idea where she went. Now, there were a number of side trails that you could have taken on the way to Hogback Ridge.
Yeah.
So, where is she at? So it was decided we set up our tent, and we stayed there in case she did get lost, but redirected and ended up finding it. So we stayed there. Caleb went back southbound, where we came from, and Fragile went northbound in case she had continued on. So those guys beat feet and they took off. So we're kind of freaking out a little bit.
I was in full panic mode. I thought for sure something had happened to her.
Right. And
I was scared.
You'll see by this picture of Tripp sitting on the log, her face, you can just kind of see the emotion.
Well, it's my sister. I mean,
yeah.
I'm going to have a lot of explaining to do to a lot of people if we don't find her safe.
Right. So we learned a few more lessons about hiking the AT. For those of you that know the AT, hiker midnight. As soon as it starts getting dark or prior to, everybody kind of starts settling in and bedding down for the evening because they've all hiked big miles. We only did 6.5. And plus, we're worried about where our family is.
Yeah.
So, we're kind of finishing setting stuff up. We don't even remember eating dinner that night. And, we're flashing our headlamps. We didn't even know the benefit of a red lamp at the time,
I got yelled at.
So she flashed a tent, and there was a guy that kind of, he yelled a little bit.
Yeah, he scolded me to get my headlamp out of his tent.
Yeah. So Fragile ended up finding her.
Yeah.
They ended up doing
11.
I think it was
and a half.
I think a total of 11 and a half. So what happened is she continued on. She went all the way past Sam's Gap, across the highway. There's an interstate right there. I think it's 26, if I'm not mistaken. And anyway, she went up and continued on, and finally she knew she didn't have it in her to hike all the way back to the shelter to look. So she basically bedded down on the side of the trail waiting for somebody to come by.
She kind of used, so they had, if I recall correctly, they had split their gear. Like she had some of their stuff and he had some of their stuff. So I think he had their teeny tiny little 2-person tent, and she had like the sleeping bags and stuff. So I think that she kind of constructed a makeshift shelter like up against a rock and had just planned to
stay there
for the night
until
because
somebody
she didn't
found her.
know what else to do. So
right. So actually, looking at my notes here, it was 5.2 extra miles that they did. So we did 6.5, and they ended up doing 11.4, which doesn't sound a lot, but for our first day hiking, it was quite a bit.
And it was late. I mean, it was pretty late by the time they made their way back.
So we're still up, and we could hear them coming up the trail, literally arguing coming up the trail, and
it was ugly.
They weren't having a good night, so they didn't come down by the shelter. They ended up pitching their tent right near the Appalachian Trail, not even down the side trail,
right next to it.
So that was the evening, and the next day we woke up, and most of the thru hikers had left. So we had a nice breakfast at the shelter there.
Experienced our first privy.
Yep, our first privy.
Which was a pretty nice view, actually.
It was.
Yeah.
So you sit down to the privy, you had this nice view kind of across the valley there. A nice breeze across the boys.
Because that one didn't have a door. Remember?
It did not. It had no door.
It was open.
So that was our first kind of experience with the moldering privy, where you poop on the pile and then you put some more leaves and duff on top of it, which is cool because they don't stink at all.
No.
And in fact, it's kind of nice not having the doors. I mean, you got to be okay with people accidentally walking up on you. You kind of give that,
when you hear the leaves rustling.
Poop in here.
Somebody coming at you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we had a nice hike the second day. So when we got to Sam's Gap, where the Wanderer, just past where the Wanderer had bedded down, so right before we got to Sam's Gap, we seen this sign up in the tree. Actually, I'll show you. It was on a post or something.
Yeah, it was like on a
piece of cardboard, right, with some magic marker on it.
Yeah.
And it had like a little picture of
and like
pizza,
a mug of beer, right?
And a mug of beer,
yeah.
And it said Trail Magic.
I was kind of mad, I'm not going to lie.
And we're like...
I thought somebody was pranking us.
Like, what Trail Magic? Is somebody being funny?
Like, this is not funny, because I would love to have that right now.
Right, and like, we're into our second day. Like, we need Trail Magic. However, so we get closer to Sam's Gap, and there's another sign, and on the bottom, there was like a box or something. It had apples in it.
Yeah.
And there were fresh apples, and I'm like, that must be for the people on the trail. So I took an apple, and everyone's like, oh, you're gonna get poisoned. Yeah. Oh my god. And I'm like, I don't care, it's a juicy apple, and I'm gonna eat this sucker. So I did. I had an apple, and it was nice.
Yeah.
So we came down into the gap, and for those that don't know, so you got the mountain, and then in between the mountains are these gaps. This particular one, there was an interstate running through, and where the interstate ran through, there was a guy with a truck, and he had a number of tables set up, and he had all kinds of food laid out, and we're like, what?
It was incredible.
We're like, what the heck is this?
He was grilling.
He was a firefighter from Florida, and his son was actually doing some trail running, I believe,
fast packing. Yeah.
So he was supposed to be moving through the area, and he was there to support his son and basically any other hikers that were coming through. So, he's like, hey, come on in. You want something to eat? You want a beer? So the Wanderer had a beer. I think we all had bananas.
And a banana.
Yeah. And it was like, oh my God, these people out here are so cool to support the hikers.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah. So had an apple, had a banana, had something to drink. So that was really, really neat. And it kind of, for those that have experienced that, it kind of restores your faith in humanity a bit, that people would do something like that. So, and that's something that we took away after the trip. It's like, wow, wouldn't this be cool to do something like, pay it forward, pay it back. We got to experience Big Bald, which was cool, and Little Bald. Actually, I think Little Bald was the third day.
Yeah.
But we actually had a really nice day on trail. We got a chance to hang out on top of Big Bald. We had lunch up there. It was fun.
I was definitely struggling with my feet like all day, though.
The next shelter that we were going to stay at was what was it called? Not the Big Mountain Shelter. So we elected to not stay at that shelter. Trips remembers there was Boy Scouts there, or there was a bunch of people, but I'm pretty sure that the stinky girls that were hiking through stayed there as well. So we decided to go past it, and Fragile had looked at his map, and there was supposedly a kind of one of those rustic sites where there's just a fire ring someplace past there. And looking back on it in gut hooks now, it was like, not even a tenth of a mile, 2/10 of a mile past the shelter. Enough where you could hear someone scream from the shelter.
Yes.
So
in the middle of the night.
So we had a really nice evening. We had a campfire. I mean, I'm showing you the pictures here. I mean, it was really, really nice. It was a perfect evening. And we can't remember if it was like late into the evening or if we had actually bedded down, but all of a sudden...
Oh, I think we were in bed. Because it was like...
It was quiet, and
piercing.
All of a sudden we heard this scream, this female scream in the middle of the night. And if you've ever been in the dark of the Appalachian Mountains and it's quiet and then you hear a woman scream at the top of her lungs and then go silent and nothing more.
Yeah, I was terrified.
It was like, what is going on? So that's what we got to fall asleep to that night. So it was kind of crazy. And then the rain started.
Yes.
And the
rain actually started before we went to bed.
It did, and I think that's what drove us to bed that night. So anyway, we went to bed. We were in our Walmart dome tent, the Ozark Trail Best.
Yeah.
And I think Fragile and the Wanderer were in...
It's that little
two-person tent. It looked like a legit backpacker's tent. And then Caleb was in a hammock.
Yeah. And
looking at the pictures, I'll show you this picture of the hammock pitched. The tarp over top of it, I can see now why it leaked. Yeah. Fragile did not. Fragile, I love you, man, but you did not have that tarp pitched. It wasn't even installed correctly. And what happened is overnight, Caleb got quite wet. Yeah,
it rained pretty heavily all night. I mean, we woke up the next morning and we were literally in a puddle. Luckily,
I bought Thermarest, biggest pad ever. I mean, seriously, there's it's like a 3-inch pad. It is a deep winter pad. If you've seen this thing on the back of my backpack, you'd laugh. So literally, we were floating on an island inside of our Ozark mountain tent in the morning. And, the edge and the end of the sleeping bags that we had, which were also huge, they got wet. Yeah. But it wasn't so much where we couldn't do another night. They would have been damp. But we got everything kind of ringed out. Managed. However, unbeknownst to us, Fragile and the Wanderer didn't really have a good night either. And Caleb just didn't have a good night. He was cold.
He was cold. Everything he had was soaked. Thoroughly.
Yeah, they kind of made the decision without us knowing that they were going to be terminating the hike later that day. So we were actually having a great hike. I mean, it was warm.
We were in the rain, but it was warm.
Yeah, it was like 60s, 70s. It had to be in the 70s because we were comfortable. Warm. And we were actually having a really good day. So we were supposed to be ending at Uncle Johnny's hostel. So we were supposed to have that one more night on the trail. And then that fourth day, hike back out to Uncle Johnny's. Yeah. Well, we got to Spivey Gap, and it was in the rain, and I remember coming through the rhododendron, and there was a beautiful little stream coming through there.
And a huge clearing
and
on the left.
I was in such a good mood, and for some reason, whenever it rains, I always seem to be in a great mood.
Yeah, you like it when it rains.
Yeah, I'm weird that way, but it was warm. We were having a great time. And I was like, oh, look at this. It's just a perfect little area we were going through. And all of a sudden, there's the Wanderer. And she had her pack off.
I don't even think that was the first thing we noticed. We noticed all those people bringing all that stuff in.
We did.
Because they were doing trail magic there, and it was like crazy.
It was epic.
Cases and cases of beer and
They had
big
a
things
tent
of coffee. They had like
set
a
up.
tent set up you could sit under. It was
I think we even smelled the burgers before we got there.
Yeah, and then we saw the Wander with.
So we're like, oh, you guys hanging out here? What's going on? And they're kind of like, well,
It was clear they didn't want to tell us.
Yeah. So Fragile ended up trying to thumb a ride back to Irwin, Tennessee. So she's like, yeah, we're calling it. His knee's hurting, and Caleb doesn't want to spend another night because his stuff's all wet. And it was like someone burst my bubble. I mean, I went from like up here to like my mood was down here, and I'm like, and she can tell.
Oh yeah.
Like
I was even disappointed.
I get
even
quiet, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, they had the van.
Miyagi does not quit things. He does not quit things.
Well, I do. I've quit 2 FKTs. Only if I have to.
Those were pretty extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
So,
So I was disappointed, but it's not just me. When you're on a group trip like that, especially when you're all traveling together.
Yes.
I was upset. I was disappointed, but I understood. I'm not going to make it a miserable night for Caleb, who's all wet. Anyway, so Joel's thumbing it. We didn't know until later he actually hopped a freight train.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether
Nobody would pick him up.
Nobody would pick him up. So he walked down the road apparently until he got a set of railroad tracks, and there was a slow-moving freight train. So Fragile got on a...
He finished it hobo style.
Yeah. He literally hopped on a freight train and took that as far as he could towards Irwin. Never got caught.
I'm not even sure how he knew, like, where to hop off.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So, kind of... And that's the reason why I gave Joel his train name Fragile, basically because he's broken. He's broken. He's fragile.
After 2 days.
But I needed to make it fancy, so you put the little apostrophe up by the I or the E or whatever it is. So we made it Fragile, so it sounds legit.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how he got his name, and I tease him about ending all the time. He put this trip together, and he's the one that he had all this really nice gear and everything, and he's the one that terminated it.
Yeah.
I don't fault him, but so he left, and we're basically hanging out,
just sitting there,
and we hung out for a long time, and it was
didn't
like
come back,
and we had no idea what was going on. So they
had their phones, I think, because I do remember Julie Wanderer trying to call him.
So we're hanging out. We had trail magic and things, and finally it was like, we should really think about trying to make it to town ourselves. Yeah. And there was this green van.
That was blue.
No, I think it was green. I got a picture of it here. So it had stickers all over the backside of this van. They're all hiking related stickers, and it was like, oh, this is interesting.
And we're just milling around, like
just
kind of on
around
the side of the road, trying to decide what to do because we didn't know where Fragile was. So should we stay or should we go?
Right, and this woman's there.
She was dropping people off.
And she had asked, "Is anybody need a ride anywhere?" I think specifically back to Irwin, and we're like, "Hey, we're at Uncle Johnny's hostel. We could really use a ride." And she's like, all right, hop in. So it was, you could tell that she shut up. We had no idea what a trail angel was, by the way. No clue.
Yeah.
This is another first for it. We learned a lot of things on this trip. So we're like, great. So, all of our stuff went in the back, and Trips and the Wanderer got in the back part, and I sat next to the driver. Female, had no idea who she was. And we're on our way in, and she's telling us these stories about having to pick up the hikers when it starts raining.
Every time we would go up in elevation, she would get service, and her phone would ring and ring and ring and ring. And
people are just calling her left and right.
Every time that would happen, she would say, the hikers are melting, the hikers are melting, because everybody wanted a ride to get out of the rain.
Right. So for those of you that hike the Appalachian Trail, the name Miss Janet might ring a bell. Yep, who knew?
We were in the bounce box.
Had absolutely no idea who this woman was, and here I'm sitting next to her in the front seat, and she's giving me crap about melting. And having to be picked up in the rain. We didn't want to leave, by the way.
Yeah,
so if you see this, Miss Janet, thank you so much.
Yes, and we're sorry for not realizing who you were.
Yeah, so...
I had no idea.
We had no idea. No clue until, of course, this trip is really... And this is why we chose this trip, is because this is really what cemented it with us. Yes. After having gotten back, it was kind of like, so how was that? And Trips likened it to childbirth.
Yes. I said, it's kind of sucky while you're doing it, but...
Not kind of. She said it sucked.
With a little time, you forget how bad it was, and then you kind of crave it again. And for me, that's how backpacking is. It was eye-opening for me.
But one of those experiences where she said, you know, it kind of sucks going through it, but after the fact, you reminisce on it and you crave it more and more. So
I've learned that's called type 2 fun.
it is. And Bryce, that's the reason why we chose this trip. It wasn't because it was like some epic, you know, West Coast type trip where you just have awesome, you know, a John Muir trail. This is where Trips and I fell in love
with
backpacking. Yep. All right, guys, that was our best trip ever, 2015 Appalachian Trail. Bryce, I want to say thanks for tagging us in this video, and now it's our turn to tag somebody else. Rob Pelton from our Pelton 1 up in Minnesota. Rob, we'd like to know, what was your best trip ever? Let us know. Guys, that'll do it for Miyagi and Trips, best trip ever. You guys have a safe one, and hopefully we'll get out on the trail soon. Cheers. See you up the trail.